in that point, I would have to hope that you remember something from our dear friend, Mr. Sherman Wheeler, who we speak of frequently, because we really don't talk about French or Spanish or any kind of other settlement in North America besides British. Now, after the Third War for Empire in 1748, it became clear that a fourth war was coming because the first three were indecisive. England was not resoundingly defeated. France was not resoundingly defeated. Both sides still had significant military capabilities. Both sides continued to be rivals, and it was only a matter of what would ignite it. And interestingly enough, the fourth and final and decisive war for empire was ignited in western Pennsylvania. The battle for North America boiled down to the Ohio River Valley, western Pennsylvania. The British knew that they had to take it. The French knew that they had to keep it. And so the result was clashes in that area. Now, frankly, in class, we spent more time on it than you would spend anywhere else in America, largely because it happened here. You know, Washington came through this area. Most people would simply say that there was a disputed area in western Pennsylvania. That disputed area, they may mention that, Dinwiddie sent an envoy, George Washington, to deliver a message to the French to leave that area because that envoy was Washington. If that envoy was Washington, they would just skip to the fight, right? They would say, the British and French troops clashed in western Pennsylvania over this area, right? So I mean, we spent a lot of time on it because it's here. And they mentioned the envoy because it was Washington. But fundamentally, I think, that the idea is that British and French colonial troops clashed over what is now western Pennsylvania. And that those clashes, the initial clashes happened in the summer of 1754. Now, anticipating a wider conflict, remember the British government summons representatives from colonial America to go to a conference in a Congress in Albany, New York. The Albany Congress. Now, the Albany Congress is 1754. And the purpose, the reason was to lure the Iroquois into an alliance with England, but also to sort of make plans for mutual protection of colonial Americans against the Native Americans and against the French. Now, what's significant about the Albany Congress is that at Albany, Benjamin Franklin, one of the leading forces there, proposed a plan of colonial unity, that would create sort of a colonial Congress and, an intricate plan of unity. Now, the plan of unity was for mutual benefit and protection. And remember, we eventually said that all the colonists, not all the colonists, but all the colonies formally rejected that plan. And we made a point of that. We said, look, in 1754, faced with the very real kind of threat of the French and Native Americans on their border, the colonies in British North America could not unify for their mutual benefit. Right? They could not unify for their mutual benefit. And that was a significant thing. The failure of the Albany Congress was significant. Right? Now, with the Albany Congress sort of failing, and England kind of being happy about that, the British decide to send regular troops to America in 1755. And those regular troops are with Edwin Braddock. And again, we talked about what became Braddock's defeat because it happened right here in western Pennsylvania. And Courtney, remember how happy we were about that it happened here in western Pennsylvania. I was thinking about this over the weekend. I was on the banks of the mighty Mississippi River in fact, Hannibal, Missouri, the home of Mark Twain. I saw Becky Thatcher's house and Twain's. You are reading that book now, Huckleberry Finn, yes. And so I was in Hannibal, Missouri. But I was thinking about this is kind of off the subject. But the Mississippi River is wide at Hannibal. It's not as wide as it is in New Orleans. You can't even see the other side of New Orleans. So if you go down to the mouth of the Mississippi, you can't see the other shore from one side. But at Hannibal, it's wider than any part of the Ohio or Monongahela that I've ever seen. And so I was thinking about this. Let's say you're like a settler, even like that army. How do you get across? You know, I mean, you come to the Mississippi River there in Missouri, and you're on one side, and it's on the other. You can't walk across it. You can't swim across it. You know, I mean, you gotta get across, and how do you get across? I mean, you can't carry a boat with you. You know, so those guys oftentimes had to, you know, construct rafts. And that's one of the things about Washington. Washington, remember, you know, is way back from delivering that message to the French. When he wanted to cross the river, he built a raft, and it like fell apart, and he fell into the river, and then eventually he got up and, you know, spent the night on an island. Guess what they call that island? Washington's Landing, right? You know, where he spent the night, and then the next day the river was frozen enough that he could walk across. I like to question that. You know, I mean, not that I want to question the father of our country, but how's that work? How cold was it? Like, you know, 1 million below zero, or, you know, I mean, you fell in one day and the next day you could walk across it. You know, I don't know. Maybe there is more to the story. But, well, that's off the subject too, because on the subject was Braddock. And they were defeated right there on the Monongahela River, right below Kennywood, right below Grandview Golf Course. A significant defeat. And we talked about how this was kind of negative for England. It looked like that they were going to sort of lose this final conflict.